Well, in our election watch this morning, we're going to be talking about campaign financing. The 2021 general election is going to be unprecedented in a number of ways, but one thing remains constant: the key role that money has to play. Money has always played a huge key role when it comes to Ugandan elections. Now, to explore this conversation further, I am joined by Mr. Emmanuel Dombo, who is the Director, Information and Publicity, NRM. Welcome to Morning at NTV.
Thank you very much, and good morning, our viewers.
And we're also joined by Mr. Henry Muguzi, who is the National Coordinator Alliance for Campaign Finance Monitoring. Welcome to Morning at NTV.
Thank you for having me. Pleasure to be here.
Now, we'll start off with some comments that Mr. Emmanuel, you made last week, where you mentioned that the NRM would be able to pay for airtime for those that would be nominated as flag bearers for the different areas. But how different is that going to be when it comes to expenses that the party does incur when it comes to this particular campaign period?
Thank you very much. First and foremost, I want people to note that the situation we're in today is totally unprecedented. And progressively, parties are taking root as opposed to individual merit. And that when parties take root and become responsible for the election of their respective flag bearers, then they can impact party control on the people they have sponsored. We cannot fully cover all costs, but given that now the elections were going in, there is no way our candidates will get to the public unless they use the social media, unless they use media, let me say. So the only way we can ensure that our candidates get to the population is by crafting up some package and negotiating with media houses an affordable rate where we can pay and ensure that our candidates can talk to the people. This has not been finalized on how it is going to be, but it's something that parties must begin contemplating if they must own the candidates that they are putting forward, and two, if they must facilitate them to ensure that they get elected. Because if you don't and others do it, then the ground may not be as fair.
Okay. Now, when you mentioned the ground may not be as fair, bringing in Mr. Muguzi into the conversation, when it comes to the standpoint of an election observer, and when it comes to money, what key money-related issues have you noticed that could perhaps trickle down because of these kinds of finances now?
Well, thank you very much. Of course, I am very encouraged with what I hear, because what we have been advocating for in the past is that in order for us to have real democracy, the political parties have to step forward, because normally it has been individual merit that has been hanging in there and reigning supreme. And this has kind of escalated the cost. And so when a political party comes out and provides this kind of thing, I think it kind of takes away the burden, but not all of it. Because you see, when you look at what a candidate spends money on overall, how much does, what percentage of the total spending of a candidate does publicity account for? And you're going to find maybe it accounts for about, what, 40%? Most of the money candidates spend go into areas of inducing voters. And therefore, I think it's a welcome initiative. It's something that other parties can borrow. It's also, it gives us food for thought. That we need to go back and rethink what kind of democracy we want to have, but democracy that puts parties at the forefront. Now, the bit of putting political parties at the forefront is that, you see, you cannot touch a party. It's a superstructure. So you remove this whole notion of contact between the voter and the electorate. Now, let me raise this as well before because see, COVID-19 has left our people economically shattered, battered, tattered. And so many of them have a lot of hope in these campaigns. And so you get to see that the candidates are going to face it rough, you know, when they gain contact, whether it's through Kakuyege or something like that. And so for the party to step forward and say, this part of the publicity will work, I think we ought to do that. And perhaps also the coordinated manner, because you see, the party can move in and say, every 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock, 7 o'clock, that's a block period for candidates. And therefore, if it's a district, all the candidates can come there and present their manifestos. Besides, we've been here before. Previously, you do have all movement candidates campaign on the same platform. So I think these are some good things we can take away from this situation.
Where do we put those that have chosen, because we've seen the numbers of those choosing to go on the independent ticket continue to rise? Where do we put those people? Will they be left out of the election in one way or another if they can't raise? Because when you mention the fact that COVID-19 has affected income streams on so many levels,
yes,
how will they be able to be a part of that as well?
Of course, when you are independent, you are on your own, and therefore you have to to come and look for more sources of campaign money in order for you to finance yourself, whether it means selling your properties or going for loans from money lenders and other credit institutions. And therefore, so that whole, you see, whether they stand as independent or not, I think in the mind of a Ugandan voter, when they look at Honorable Dombo, they look at him not as NRM but as a person. And therefore, you can say the party has done good things for you, but often we have heard them say, okay, we hear you and we've seen the party do this and so on, but what about you? What is it that you are bringing on board? And so this has makes life difficult for whether you are sponsored by a political party or you are independent. They face the same kind of electorate that is money hungry.
Okay. Well, when you mention the fact that what about you, what are you bringing on board? You know, this takes us to incumbency for a number of those who perhaps know that this particular person has been here, they have done this and all. Now the new faces that are coming into the rest, and I'll start with you, Mr. Emmanuel, and come to you, Henry, on this conversation. When it comes to incumbency, what assurances are there going to be in place to ensure that incumbents don't misuse these positions of resources to actually claim an upper hand in one way or another?
One of the things, let us accept the facts. I hate hiding and getting into semantics. Once you are an incumbent, it naturally gives you an advantage over the others. I don't want to come here and say, no, there will be level ground. No, it cannot be. When you're an incumbent, previously you could call a meeting to teach the people about a law you passed. But you'd also advance your personal agenda as a candidate, even when nominations have not been declared. There you'd have an advantage. Right now, you can go and teach people about COVID. Or you can go and explain about the use of masks. You can go and talk about a government program. But in so doing, people are also getting an opportunity to know you. They are listening to your message. But you can also end by saying, don't forget about me. And that is the advantage of incumbency. But I want to tell you, to me, I'm using these particular elections as a study. Because the incumbents have had greater opportunity to interact with the electorate if they use their time well. And we have new people who are coming in who are not going to conduct rallies. They may use the media, but we want to look at the election outcome. Will the incumbents benefit out of their having been incumbents, or will they not? That is something that everybody must watch, and could be the data analysts who will tell us what would inform the outcome of the elections. But the first question you asked on the independents, I wanted to make a take on that.
Please go ahead.
There is a debate right now which must be concluded. When the organizations are in contestation, does an individual has an individual agenda there? That must be resolved over time. Because if parties are making an agenda, if I'm going to be elected as Dombo for president of Uganda, and I don't have an organization I'm associating with, and then we get into parliament, and I must rely on parliament, which members of parliament am I going to rely on? If you're going to put an agenda as NRM, President Museveni is coming, in order to ensure that his agenda sails through, he must also ensure that the members of parliament who belong to NRM must get through, so that when they are fully constituted, they can pursue the agenda of NRM. But right now, independents may come in. After all, the motivation progressively may be otherwise, other than the opportunity to serve the people. Because there is a quid pro quo, which I don't want to go into now, but which is a very big attraction to many people when they offer themselves as independents.
Okay. To you, Henry, your comments on incumbents.
Incumbents. It's quite interesting. You see, the nature of our electorate is such that it when it comes to levels like parliament, district council, incumbents may not favor you a lot, which is why you know and you've witnessed the previous elections. The turnover in that house sometimes is 70%. This time we expect by there about 80% not returning. Now, if you've been an incumbent, you remember you have spent most of the time either in Kampala, in Parliament, or at the district, district council. On the ground, there is this individual that is interacting on a daily basis, okay? And you see, because of the nature of our electorate, that gets to think that at every encounter with an elected leader, they should get money. They make life so difficult for these elected leaders that they choose to stay away. But by staying away, there is another individual that is now taking advantage. And therefore, for many of the MPs that have been in Kampala here and not going back down, there are many of them who have not been picking up calls from the electorate. And for right reasons, because maybe the funds that money is scarce and the demand is never system to ceaseless. So they may not stand that high advantage. Remember, sometimes the electorate would would base their decisions on the number of social enterprises we've put on the ground. And those who are aspiring, if they have used their time well, certainly have made a good thing. Plus also, you remember, I think people are also angry. People are also angry because of what happened when they touched it. And therefore, yeah, so I think, but people are angry, but also hungry, because COVID-19 has shattered them. And therefore, the situation is going to be quite interesting. But also, we are studying. You see, one thing we want to study as Alliance for Campaign Finance Monitoring is this: that how much does Open Rally contribute? First of all, we look at the numbers. Ordinarily, in a number, how many people come to a rally? And how many votes when you compute that, how many votes does a particular candidate garner in a particular constituency? Do really those rallies count a lot? Because on some of them you'll find children making up the numbers. Some of the people who come to these rallies don't even vote. So we are also studying to see how we can inform our democracy.
Okay, now you make mention of the electorate. And the electorate, you mentioned how they are angry right now, they are frustrated. When you mentioned, Mr. Dombo, about the fact that the financing is in line with just messages that are going to be perhaps put on different social media platforms, on traditional media, but what message is the electorate looking for right now? And does the money in any way relate to the message that they're looking for?
To us as a party, when we talk of creating an opportunity for our candidates to be heard, we want them to explain the party manifesto, but we also want them to explain what the party has so far done. Because that is something, because we know the opposition, all the people we are competing with, will want as much as possible to negate the achievements we have done. They will try as much as possible to twist what has been achieved for it to appear as negative, or to say perhaps we should have done better. But we also must explain why we didn't do what we didn't do. It is something that the audience or the voters are entitled to in order for them to make an informed decision. This is very key, although at times people ignore. But like my colleague has said, when it comes to the voter expectation, to them at times, their mind is elsewhere. And it is made worse by the candidates themselves.
How so?
First, they begin by accusing the incumbents that they didn't do this, they didn't help you to buy an ambulance. There is something, if you looked right now, you would see that I would wonder why a member of parliament would choose not to push government to procure ambulances, and they choose to buy ambulances by themselves and then put there their posters. That is something, that is an area that must also be regulated. They must allow them, if they want to buy ambulances, fine, but the ambulance must be respected with its code and should not bear any of those things that members of parliament put on those. So, by what they do and say, they totally misdirect the expectations of the voters to expect at times help. Now in this COVID-19, you have seen what postal distribution has created. There are people, if there is famine, they naturally expect that their leader is going to provide them food, In the Butaleja, we have had a problem of floods, for instance. And whenever there is going to be a flood, as member of parliament, you must either come and explain, or go to Red Cross and get them some relief materials, or arrange for their alternative accommodation if the floods have come. So the people's expectation may be beyond what is in the manifesto, but that one will come with civic education and with civilization. Because right now many people believe that pay me and I also pay you. And the vote has become a quid pro quo issue, and many people are taking it as that.
That's very true. Now, Henry, I see you nodding. I don't know if you're nodding in agreement to Emmanuel's comments, or is it more the other side?
It's quite more a mix of both. Because you see, when it comes to our politics, there are quite a number of things that that get to be distorted. And I think the time has come for us to start a serious conversation on how do we get this on track. Now, the people will tell you that, okay, we hear you, we hear the manifestos, we know these, we like them. But we also know that people come and promise they don't come. Okay, they will tell the government that you started, there's time you probably start modernization, and then you went to prosperity, and then maybe we've not seen any of these, we don't feel them here. Okay, but in the intervening period, I must survive. And therefore, whether you run as many adverts on radio, that counts for nothing until you've given me something. The bottom line is this, that I think we need, first of all, to have things that constrain candidates. Because you see, the electorate is so money hungry that there is no amount of intervention now that can stop that. The best way to stop it is to cut the supply lines. If you get candidates, stop doing this. Otherwise, when you look at the situation that the political candidates are facing today, you really feel pity. Because when you speak with the electorate, they're saying, let them come. Okay, you look at some hungry, kind of people. But also, when you speak to some of these candidates, they tell you that when you ask why do you think that elections must be about money, and they tell you, see, our people have a problem, they don't understand ideology. So the thinking between the political actors is that a Ugandan voter does not appreciate political ideas. Ideas do not matter. What matters is what they see in the beginning. And so it's going to be quite difficult, and democracy in this country will not, I think, will not get onto the direction we want it to get until we do that. But also, he mentioned something. These fellows who go and re-engineer their roles into provision of things that government should have provided. He mentions ambulances. You look at an ambulance that is emblazoned with posters of this candidate, even outside the campaign period. You see, the moment they swear in, from 20, the ambulances that were purchased in 2016 by these aspiring candidates, and so it keeps making rounds. And sometimes even in town here, there's a time I saw one which had emblazoned with the pictures of Honorable Kabazulu Guluka of Nakawa, and it was making, sirens woo around Fairway, but inside there was nothing. But the bottom line was, can I draw attention of the people to see that so I think we need to have an intervention on this if politics is going to be sanitized. We need to sanitize our politics. Our elections have to be clean and hygienic. Okay.
Now, taking it back to the money, one of the things that a number of times they'll say, but where does this money come from? When, Emmanuel, you announced that the NRM would be paying for this airtime, a number of people are wondering, but where is this money coming from? So let's talk about where the money that the NRM is going to come from.
First and foremost, as a party, the party has a responsibility to raise funding through fundraising from friends, from members of the party, and they also, I will not say statutory, but there are obligations of some members earning members of the party to make contributions to the party. Members of parliament, district council, leaders, those who are paid a salary. They are required to pay a certain percentage in order to enable the party to run. But when you look at our nominations, the Central Executive Committee had to approve nomination fees. And For instance, nomination for a person who is going to vie for a flag bearer for president or for chairman of the party is 10 million. Although the amount of money spent on processing his papers may not be as much, but then that one cross-subsidizes the other areas that have not. For instance, if we had gotten about 10 people coming in, that would be 100 million, and that would really be a big contribution to other areas. But look at members of parliament. Last elections, when we were receiving the report from the Electoral Commission, we raised about 8 billion money that was collected as nomination fees. And this year, we expect somewhere more than 10 billion that people are going to pay, because progressively every election becomes more competitive and attracts more participants. And 10 billion, for us, we believe that will be part of the cost. That will help us to array the costs of the media and any other costs that are related to the campaigns. Okay. But, like he said, when you look at media contribution, when we talk of booking space, one of the things which people thought, they thought that because NRM is in government, it would use its advantage to use media, public media, UBC for free. We cannot, because there are regulations. But also, we know that private media owners may want to cash in, because they would think this is the opportunity, and this is an area that should be regulated, so that the media houses do not ask beyond what people can afford to pay, but also media houses should not be pressed hard for them not to cover their operating costs. So it is a negotiated and balanced thing that we must do, but for us, members are making a contribution, and the party is going to do fundraising and make its own contribution also to facilitate the process.
Now, when you mentioned that members are making a contribution, is there a particular amount, or is it out of their free will of if this is what I can give, this is what they give?
No, members, for instance, members of parliament, there is a specific amount of money they contribute every month.
How much do they contribute?
I don't remember the figure. I remember the figures when I was last there. It was some good money. About that, he should be able to know, because I'm no longer there, and I didn't find out from my treasury. If I did know that I would specifically be asked, I would answer. But I know the basic is that members of parliament pay. And it's not only in NRM. One of the challenges other parties have had with their members of parliament is because they stopped making contributions to their respective parties. And that's why they are being denied the opportunity to be nominated in their respective parties. In NRM, those I am yet to find out, but I don't think any member of parliament would stop and come back to NRM when he hasn't made the good, because that's a requirement, and people must be responsible.
You see, when you ask about sources of campaign money, that's a very sensitive question.
But one that we should get into.
It is also a very sticky issue in this country.
Why?
Which is why you won't be surprised that when the president was assenting to those electoral amendment bills, the provisions that originally were requiring candidates to declare sources of campaign money have been removed. Now, when God created us, he put us in a world with temptations. We live with temptations. Now, when you are in government, you are part in power, such as the NRM. And having been there for 4 years, and having experienced a fusion of systems, there are temptations that emerge every time. The temptation of raiding on the national treasury to finance issues to finance activities of the party. Now, the question of whether are they able to withstand this temptation. So in developed societies where democracy has taken root, parties in power are able to withstand these temptations. In Africa, they've not been so successful in resisting these temptations. So that's one area. The other area is about those quid pro quo arrangements. You see, in this country and other African countries, it matters for you to do business when you are on the right side of politics. And therefore, quite a number of business people and companies would be happy and willing to contribute handsomely to a party or candidates that they think will go through for quid pro quo reasons, because when they go through there, they expect contracts to come their way. Okay? And so these temptations are there. So sometimes there could even be dirty money coming from out of the country. I am very impressed with what I have seen today with one Kantankara's Dr. Stella Nyanzi. He has put out a poster and is saying, look, if you support me, please make a contribution to my campaign, okay, to my election campaign, so that it can transpire out there that it is you, the people, that have contributed to me, okay? I think at this time you would expect candidates to be doing such programs. If you are a political party, put out, sell your program out there and let the people that want to subscribe to you, you know, contribute. But in Uganda, it's the reverse, because when people come to associate to a political party, they expect to get from it instead of them contributing. Okay? When people come to support a candidate, they expect the candidate to give instead of them giving. And so these are some of the things we need to grapple with. And so that question of sources of campaign money remains, I think, sticky.
That takes us to the conversation about accountability, because there's also a bit of the electorate has to hold you accountable in one way or another. Now, in the past, even just the beginning of this year, we saw some money floating around, sources unknown, heaps of money being given, say, to some musicians, being given out in different areas. And who accounts for this money? Where does it come from? Where does it go? Those questions on accountability, because within the country, even just going to government, the question on accountability remains one so vague. So I'll start with you, Emmanuel, and come to you, Henry, on that.
Accountability, when you look at the official, there are issues which are easier to trace. For instance, under the Political Parties and Organizations Act, where political parties are allowed to be funded by government, there is a block amount of money which political parties share. And these are public funds, and they are required to be audited. Yesterday I was looking at some of the audit reports for NRM. The auditor had brought a management letter and raised some questions about how certain things were done. And this therefore tells you, because that is a statutory thing that we must do. If we don't, the Auditor General will ask. It can even cause the Electoral Commission not to release additional funding unless you have accounted and been audited. But like I said, when a private party solicits money privately, and have gotten money privately, and the law does not require them to do certain things, there are things that you shall not know. But also, I know that I've seen the president, for instance, in Kampala, moving into social groups, and women groups, and youth groups, those that needed to be empowered, and given an opportunity either to begin life afresh or to retool their lives. I think those opportunities, although we at times look at the president as a candidate throughout, but he's also the president of Uganda, who is given tools that enable him to empower the people to do certain type of things. These are things what people must differentiate, because whether they like it or not, when he's a candidate, he's also the president of Uganda. And he's responsible for ensuring that the lives of the people are transformed. Now, to what extent can he do that without people thinking that is helping him to do certain things? That's what I told you, that is the power of the incumbency. When you are an incumbent, there are things that you can do and you may not do.
Now, Henry, when Emmanuel mentions that, we take a look at the bloodline between being a candidate and the person of the president. You get to appoint. You get to appoint those within the Electoral Commission. You get to appoint the Auditor General. So accountability, democracy, where does that come into?
Yeah, thank you very much. Quite interesting discussion we're having. And you see, when it comes to accountability, I would start with the president and start with the reality. The reality is the president is obviously the fountain of honor. And when you have the fountain of honor, you meet your people, there are certain things that I expect. And within our cultures are, we have, in my own culture, is they say, if you meet with a leader, and you don't ask for something from him, you appear to be rude. So some people think you cannot go to the president and not ask. If I don't ask, I will be rude. That is culture. But beyond that, we have democracy to grapple with. The democracy is such that, you see, if I have come and I have given you money, then you do not have you don't have any locus to hold me accountable to anything. The truth is, we live in a political system that is so monetized. We practice politics of commercialization, politics of mercantilism. Some of the people that are in the politics are there for money. And therefore, you see, when you are in politics for money, you know money gets money and money gets more money. And therefore, you must spend more money. But in the process of spending, you are compromising so many attributes, including accountability. People that have received so much money from a leader cannot have the backbone to hold them accountable. No wonder. In this country today, nobody wants to raise up. Instead of electorate holding elected leaders accountable, it is the politicians holding electorate accountable. You have a mess. People do what they want when they want, whether it be at the local level, local government level, where the rubber touches the ground, where services are delivered to the Mutuawansi. There is no accountability there. Reason? When they came to elect these leaders, they, instead of requesting to understand what is it they're going to offer, they asked for money, and the money they received. And when they received the money, then they sold their right to hold them accountable. And therefore, when he gets there in political office, he's not going to have to exert any pressure on the technocrats to deliver services. He's instead going to ally with them, connive, and then so that they can recoup what he invested. The same happens at the national level now. Until we have removed the money from politics. We understand that politics needs money, but this money that is dished around, the money which you're asking, where does it come from? Who accounts for it? Because people see these things, they see a sack being given out to these people, and many of them would pose around. We saw what is the name? Brian something.
Brian White.
Yeah. And then Catherine, and they get to make those, WhatsApp videos and which go viral. And so the people wonder, where does this money come from? Who accounts for it? Do we have any left? Or is it a game now of money and so on? So I think these are wrong things. We need to get back. If I am the president, for instance, I should be able to understand that, yes, people want something to eat in the intervening period. But what they want in the long run is not necessarily money. Let me make sure that there are systems in place that improve their services and livelihoods. Because Jesus told us, don't give someone fish, teach them how to fish. So I think some of these things, God, you have mentioned them. We don't have accountability. Accountability mechanisms are very weak, both within institutions, but also between leaders and the elected leaders and the electorate. These are things we need to rethink and get back on track.
Okay, now as we wind up the conversation, talking about monetization of politics, there's commercialization of politics. And we'll just go back to early this year when Parliament passed the Electoral Amendments Bills of 2019. Now, it since emerged that the versions the President assented to were without the provisions of campaign financing.
Yes.
One thing that was left out. So what sort of legal checks and balances do we need to curb the commercialization of politics? Because as you say, in one way or the other, it goes down to service delivery later on. So Emmanuel, your thoughts, and Henry.
Commercialization of politics, money in politics cannot totally be eliminated. Because when you look at the modern countries, like the US, even their finance reform to hold the leaders accountable is something that is not very old. It is something that is still growing, where people are required to declare the source, to declare the amount, but also to ensure that people are accountable. In Uganda, it is not something that is not coming with ease. One, even if you made a referendum on it, definitely people will not allow that it should be checked. Because why? Because if they know their right to go to coerce candidates to get something out of them is going to be forfeited because of the law, then they will not accept, if you did a referendum. Two, the members of parliament themselves, who are going to be required. When they get elected, they feel the pinch that they must do away with the resources in order to fund things they shouldn't have been funding. And they can now make a law because they are feeling the pain. But their opponents who are in the village, they will be talking against it exactly that. They're saying these are passing the law because they have gotten there and they are eating money. Now they don't want to come back and do this. So right now, what we need to do progressively is civic education. I know we have legal reforms that talk about money laundering, so that a terrorist group cannot fund an activity in Uganda to influence the outcome, and that perhaps you can't use data money progressively if you can trace where the data is coming from. But right now, we still have a challenge. We just need to do civic education. And once civic education is done, and then we need to enact strong laws that will ensure that people don't do that. But also, the electorate themselves, their expectations should be toned down. That when I'm going to be elected, let them expect for me to carry their views to government, other than them expecting just money from me, or that I should be using money in order to influence what the decision they are going to do.
Okay, now Henry, I just need you to briefly answer that question because we're out of time.
Right. So in countries where democracy has stabilized, they have found a way of dealing with money in politics and elections. Let me start by saying that politics needs money. There must be money in politics, but there must be a limit, because much of it then crosses the border and gets into areas that are toxic. Now, countries have enacted laws that regulate money in election campaigns, because election campaigns is a period that is so different and so vulnerable to external forces. Now, in Uganda, we have been trying to work around something, enacting something to regulate money in election campaigns. We have money, we have laws that regulate money in political parties, anti-money laundering laws are there, but you see, election campaigns are such a unique thing that countries where democracy has advanced have picked out those legislations. Now, we do know that the bills that the Attorney General presented to Parliament had these provisions, not significant, but just requiring disclosure. They would also have required the putting caps on how much you can spend and reporting and how you manage it and so on. We know that as they left Parliament, these bills had these provisions. This would have been a game changer if the arena of financing election campaigns in this country would never have been the same if those laws provisions had been upheld. Now, between Parliament and the Office of the President, those provisions decided to disappear in thin air. Because when you look at what the President has assented to, it's completely denuded of those provisions. But I think the time is now when this is something we can no longer run away from. We needed to stick our heads there. We need to legislate and develop strong laws that can regulate the utilization of money in election campaigns.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us on Morning at NTV. Our conversation was about campaign financing. Now, we do know from what we have had the conversation, civic education has stood out. Also, that you as the voter, you need to stop asking for the money, and perhaps you should, in one or another, give the candidate the money. Well, that was our conversation. I was joined by Mr. Emmanuel Dombo, the Director, Information and Publicity, NRM, and also Mr. Henry Muguzi, National Coordinator at Alliance for Campaign Financing Monitoring. Thank you once again for joining us on Morning at NTV.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you for having us.
We're now going to take a short break, but Morning at NTV continues.